I wish I could hear her laugh one more time.
Yeah.
Just one more time.
When I was young, the dangerous men were easy to recognize. You could see it in the way they held their jaw. Something tight, something decided. Today, some of the most broken people you'll ever see look completely ordinary. They're standing in line at the gas station, sitting across from you at the diner, walking through a parking lot under the kind of fluorescent light that makes everybody look a little pale. And you'd never know. You'd never guess. That's what scares me now. Not the recognizable monster, the invisible one. My name doesn't matter much anymore. I'm 91 years old. I've outlived 3 presidents I actually shook hands with, 2 wars I watched from living rooms, and more funerals than I care to count. I sit here most nights in this old chair my wife picked out in 1972. She's been gone 11 years now. The house gets quiet in a way I never could have imagined when she was alive. And in that quiet, you start to think about things. Things most people don't sit still long enough to think about. I think about how people break. Not buildings, not machines, people. And I've been watching it happen for a long time. Back in the 50s, when I was a young man working at a textile plant in South Carolina, there was a fella named Gerald. Quiet man, never caused a problem. He'd eat his lunch alone most days, sitting on a wooden crate outside the loading dock, staring at the gravel like it owed him something. We all just figured he was private. That's what we called it then, private. We didn't have the language we have today. We didn't have the vocabulary for what was actually happening to him inside. He wasn't private. He was disappearing, slowly, right in front of us. And we just kept eating our sandwiches. One morning, Gerald didn't come in. And then he didn't come in the next day. And when they found him, he was sitting in his truck out on Route 17, 3 miles from the plant. Just sitting there, engine off. He'd been there all night. Didn't hurt anybody, didn't do anything dramatic, just stopped. Like a clock that ran out of whatever it is that keeps a person moving forward. The foreman said Gerald had just quit. I always thought something quit on Gerald first, long before he quit on anything else. That's what I mean when I say society stopped knowing the difference between a man who chose darkness and a man who fell into it because no one was watching where he was walking. Now, I'm not making excuses for the ones who do harm. Understand that clearly. There's evil in this world, real evil. I've seen it. I've stood close enough to it to feel the temperature drop. Some people make choices that cannot be explained away by loneliness or suffering. Some people decide, and that decision lives entirely in them. I'm not talking about those people tonight. I'm talking about the others. The ones who started out as somebody's child, somebody's kid sitting in the back seat on a Sunday drive, watching telephone poles go by. Perfectly ordinary, full of some quiet potential that the world just never found a way to reach. The ones who grew up wrong, not because they were born wrong, but because everything around them slowly went sideways and nobody noticed until it was too late to pull them back. I remember a young man from the neighborhood where I raised my kids in the 1970s. Let me call him Raymond. Raymond grew up 3 houses down. His father worked nights at a gas depot, and his mother worked mornings at a school cafeteria. So Raymond was alone a lot. Not neglected in a dramatic way, fed, clothed, roof over his head, but alone in that particular American way that doesn't show up on any report. Alone in the hours between 3 in the afternoon and 9 at night, when a boy needs something to push against, something to make sense of himself inside of. Raymond used to sit on our front step sometimes when my wife was home. She'd give him a glass of sweet tea and talk to him about nothing in particular. Sports, school, whatever. And I used to watch from the kitchen window and think, this boy is starving for something that has no name at the grocery store. By the time Raymond was in his mid-20s, he'd been in and out of county lockup twice. Nothing catastrophic, but the trajectory was clear to anybody who'd been watching long enough. He wasn't mean-spirited. He wasn't a predator. He was a man who had slowly, quietly been eaten alive by years of emotional silence, and nobody, not a teacher, not a neighbor, not a pastor, not a counselor, had managed to get there in time. He ended up in the system. He ended up another number. And the number didn't tell the whole story. Numbers never do. America changed. I watched it change. In the 60s and 70s, there was still something holding communities together, even as everything else was breaking apart. You knew your neighbor's name. You knew if the widow at the end of the block hadn't put her lights on by 8 o'clock. You knew if the veteran across the street was drinking again, because you could hear the TV going until 3 in the morning. There were frictions. Lord, there were frictions. But there was also a kind of involuntary witness. People saw each other, whether they meant to or not. Somewhere in the 80s and 90s, that changed. I can't tell you exactly when. It wasn't one moment. It was like watching a fog come in off the water, slow. And then suddenly you looked up and couldn't see the other side of the street anymore. People moved more. Neighborhoods turned over faster. The front porch disappeared, literally and figuratively. People stopped sitting outside in the evenings. And when they stopped sitting outside, they stopped seeing. And when they stopped seeing, certain kinds of suffering became invisible. Not because people were cruel, but because the architecture of everyday life stopped putting us in the same place at the same time. I think about the men I've seen over the years in the particular loneliness of middle age. That's a hard age nobody talks about, honestly. 50, 55. The kids are gone if there were kids. The marriage is strained or ended. The body is starting to send reports you don't want to read. The job is either gone or feels like it's going. And the friendships, the ones from youth, the ones that used to fill the weekend, those have thinned out in ways that are hard to explain and somehow embarrassing to admit. Because in America, a grown man is not supposed to say, "I am lonely. I have no one to call. I don't know who I am now that I'm not what I used to be." That silence is its own kind of poison. I've sat in diners at 7 in the morning and watched men eat alone, with the particular efficiency of someone performing a task rather than having a meal. Eyes down, quick, like they're afraid if they slow down, something will catch up to them. I've driven past apartment buildings late at night and seen a single window lit on the 4th floor, blue from a television, and thought about who's in there. Not with pity exactly, with something more complicated than pity. A recognition, maybe, that an enormous amount of human suffering happens in rooms that no one walks into. There was a man I read about, not someone I knew personally, just a story in the paper about 10 years back, who had lived in the same apartment in a Midwestern city for 8 years, worked a warehouse shift, paid his rent on time. And when something finally went wrong, when he finally reached the end of whatever thread had been keeping him connected to ordinary life, the neighbors said they barely knew he was there. 8 years, same building, and the most anyone could say was that they barely knew he was there. That sentence haunts me, because I know that's not a story about a monster. That's a story about a failure of human proximity, a failure of witness. A man can lose himself completely in plain sight if the people around him have also retreated behind their own closed doors. Now, I want to be very careful here, because there's a version of this conversation that goes wrong. There's a version that says, well, he was mentally ill, so nothing could have been done, or, well, he was evil, so nothing should have been done differently. Both of those answers let everyone off too easy. The truth is harder and less comfortable than either of those. Some people who do terrible things are genuinely, profoundly ill in ways that were never treated, never identified, never even given a name. And we failed them before they ever failed anyone else. That's not an excuse. It is a fact. And facts don't care about our comfort. Some people who do terrible things made choices, real choices, and they need to be held to account for those choices. That's also a fact. The hard part, the part that keeps me up at night in this quiet house, is knowing that often by the time we're asking which one it is, we've already waited too long to matter. I think about the veterans I've known, men who came back from places that rearranged something fundamental inside them, and then were handed a handshake and a discharge paper and told to go on living as if the rearrangement hadn't happened. Some of them did. God bless the ones who did. But some of them spent the next 20, 30, 40 years trying to put themselves back together with whatever tools they happened to have lying around. And sometimes those tools were bottle-shaped, and sometimes those tools were silence. And sometimes the silence became a wall so thick that by the time anyone thought to knock on it, the man on the other side had already made peace with being unreachable. I'm not telling you any of this to make you afraid. I don't think fear is the right response. I think the right response is something quieter and harder. It's attention. It's the willingness to notice, to know your neighbor's name, to check on the man who always eats alone, to sit with the discomfort of not knowing whether someone is fine or whether fine is the only word they have left. My wife used to say, "The most dangerous thing in the world is an empty room with too much time in it." She meant it about herself on the bad days, but I've come to think she was talking about all of us. Any of us, in the right circumstances, in the wrong season of life, in a room that got too quiet for too long, can start to lose the thread that connects us to the world that is still out there waiting for us to come back to it. I've lived 91 years. I've watched good people go dark for lack of light. I've watched hard men soften when something finally reached them. I've watched some people get the help they needed just in time, and I've watched others fall just short of it. And if there is one thing I know with the full weight of 9 decades of watching, it is this: the line between the person who makes it and the person who doesn't is not always character. Sometimes it is witness. Sometimes it is one person who happened to notice, one conversation that happened to occur, one door that happened to stay open long enough. We stop keeping those doors open, and we've been paying for it in ways that show up in headlines and statistics and empty rooms and fluorescent-lit parking lots at 2 in the morning. We've been paying for it in the particular quiet of people who needed to be heard and never were. The night is long in this old house. I sit in this chair and I listen to it. And sometimes I think the most honest thing I can say after all this living is simply pay attention. That's all. Just pay attention to the people around you. Not because you can save everyone. You cannot. But because the alternative, the looking away, the assuming, The deciding it isn't your business has costs we keep pretending we don't recognize. We recognize them. We've always recognized them. We just haven't decided as a people that they're worth the trouble of looking directly at. Maybe that's the real thing that changed. Not the people, the looking. Good night.